In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in Black and White emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Good evening, America, and welcome. Welcome to America in Black and White. I'm your host, Charles Zachary King, and I want to say right now, right here, from the top of this show, I am grateful you are here tonight. Because tonight, we're not just doing television. Tonight, we're having a real conversation. We are 4 seasons deep. This is episode 94, and today is June 17th, 2026. I want you to mark this date because what you're about to hear has the very real potential to shift the way you think about your life, your work, and what you call success. See, we spend so much of our time running, building, grinding, stacking. We hustle for the corner office, for the 6 figures, for the 7 figures, for the recognition, for the respect, and somewhere in the middle of all that building, a lot of us look around and realize something painful. We built the thing we dreamed of, and we don't feel free. We feel trapped, owned by the very thing we created. Tonight, we're going to unpack that. Tonight, we're going to ask the hard question: what is your success actually costing you? And more importantly, is it worth it? My guest tonight has spent over 3 decades walking alongside business owners, executives, and leaders, people running 6, 7, and 8-figure operations across the Caribbean and the United States, helping them redesign how they lead, how they live, and how they reclaim what matters most. He has sat across the table from global organizations like PwC and Unilever. He was born in Trinidad, lived across the Caribbean, and now his work is reaching the world. He calls himself and the world has started to agree, the freedom architect. Tonight, freedom is a business strategy. I need you to lean in, get comfortable, because whether you are an entrepreneur, an executive, a dreamer, or somebody who is just starting to ask the question, this conversation is for you. What you're about to hear could genuinely change how you define success forever. So, Black and White America, let's go. America in Black and White, episode 94. Let's get into it, and let's bring Mr. Andre Alexander to the stage. Hello, sir.
Hi, Charles. I really had to be humbled by such a powerful introduction. I don't even know if we need a conversation again after that.
Yes, sir. So is there anything you'd like to say to the audience before we get into the show?
Really, it's my pleasure to be here. Glad that Charles has me on as a guest. And after such a powerful introduction, I hope I can live up to his billing. So ready to get into it whenever you are, Charles.
Alrighty. So let's start so people get to know who Andre was before Andre became the person that he is today. Take me all the way back to Trinidad. Paint the picture for us. What was life like growing up there, and what did the world look like through young Andre Alexander's eyes?
That's a long way back. What I would say straight off is that I had an amazing childhood. You know, especially when I see what's happening now. Uh, we we truly had freedom. You know, like freedom as children to grow, to express ourselves. Uh, our, my parents especially never really pressured us too much with exams and that type of stuff. We were allowed to grow and have fun, and uh, they exposed us to a lot of different cultures. My father came from a what you call a rural background in Trinidad. Uh, my father did finish secondary school, yeah, but all his children from his background. He fully embraced where he came from. He made sure we knew his side of the family coming from a rural background, and I guess that helped us as we grew up. So my family was four kids in wedlock, and I have a brother and a sister on my father's side prior to that. And we grew up knowing each other, which was another, big plus as far as I'm concerned. Um, but as I said, we had really a lot of freedom. Um, we were, we were given a prod whenever we needed to. Like when I was up until the age of 11, I didn't really play too much sports, for instance. And my father was the one to kind of push me into it, like he saw the guys in the neighborhood going up the road to play football. And he was, why don't you all take my son? He said, all he has to do is to come up onto the field. And he said, well, he'll be there tomorrow. And that wasn't a question. You just went because you were sent. But those are the types of things we expected. And that's how we got exposed to many different things. And then sports became a huge part of my life as a result of that. And the relationships that I've enjoyed off of sports is priceless.
So the Caribbean carries such a distinct culture of community, resilience, and entrepreneurial spirit. How did the environment you grew up in shape the way you think about business and leadership today?
Okay, Charles has a really long story, but I'll give it a shot. Okay. So I'd say my entrepreneurial spirit came from my dad because that's how he elevated himself. He started out in sales. He saw the opportunity for business. He actually owned, I guess you all call it a service station. We call it a gas station in this part of the world. And then, he evolved into other businesses. I came into it because it seemed like I had an aptitude for figures. He recognized that. He asked me to help him in the business, to keep his books, do his taxes, that type of stuff. And I was doing that for him when I was about 15. So that's how I got introduced into entrepreneurship. And then from school, I started to work with PricewaterhouseCoopers. It was only Pricewaterhouse in those days. From there, I went to Canada to study to become a CPA. When I came back, I started to work with Unilever in Trinidad as well. And then from Unilever, I moved up the islands, similar manufacturing enterprises. I think what was good for me is that all the leaders I became exposed to, they were, let's say, very progressive with bringing people along, bringing young talent along. So I was always exposed to much higher than my level, and that helped shape how I looked at leadership, going forward. I was always keen to expose others to develop to their best ability. What was surprising to me is, as I came up the islands, I was asked why would I share so much with people beneath me, and I found it strange. And they were looking at it from a fear basis, like if you show them too much, they could replace you. They didn't see that if you bring somebody along to actually replace you, then you can move into a higher position, right? And elevate the company as well, right? So that's what I started to try and show them. The more you expose someone, right, is the more you grow as a leader and the more your organization will grow, right? Because now everything doesn't depend on you. You've brought along leaders who could take your place whenever you step out. So it means you could go on vacation without having to be bothered, right? You put systems in place. You mentioned, what successful business people suffer with. A lot of them suffer because they don't bring along leaders within their business because feel important by everything having to come through them, but then they become the bottleneck, and the business can only grow to the extent of their capacity, as against bringing people along, right? Developing capable leaders, and then giving you the time to lead with vision, as against just lead by reaction.
So, as you think about this experience, this is a two-part question here. How did that relate to what you were learning and doing in the community in which you grew up in, and how that environment was, and how you needed to change it? But also, what did this change you? What did this teach you, or what were you learning about your business acumen that you're using today?
And let me see if I could deal with the first one. I'd say, from a cultural standpoint, I guess I learned to not be hasty with my decisions. Right? Take time to explore, with a little more depth, right? Rather than be reactionary. Because reaction may fix something short term, right? But then, is it going to repeat itself? Is it a long term fix? Is it sustainable, right? When you give yourself time to think, right? Time to really align with whatever vision you may have had for your business, right? That's what becomes sustainable. So I'm blessed that I had those types of leaders around me, right? Yes, there are going to be times when you need to make a decision right away, right? But in most cases, people are hustling you for an answer because that's what they know, that's what they expect, right? If you step back, I almost guarantee that you will make a better decision, because you're not going to be coming at it from a position of stress, right? You'd have given yourself time to process and think with vision. Like, is this going to align with where we want the business to go? How we want the business to grow? How we want the people within the business to grow as well? How we want to serve those people? So I'd say that would be sort of my answer to the first part of the question. Do you want to go over the second part of the question again for me, just to make sure I've covered what you were
Yes.
expecting me to cover?
So, with that learning and that experience, especially you going back to school to learn to be a CPA, what has that experience taught you that you use today in your business acumen?
Okay, I think your audio cut out a little bit, but I believe I got the gist of what you're asking. I might give a surprising answer here, but so I did the CPA, right, very early. Like, I was qualified by 25, right? I had my designation by 25. And then after that was all career and then moving into consulting, right? Which I didn't do until I went to Dominica and then in Antigua. And one of the things that should help me to understand progression was that it doesn't happen in isolation. In my case, it happened because I had a lot of support. You don't necessarily think about it when it's occurring, right? But so my first job was PwC in Trinidad, right? That came about because my father had some linkage with somebody in PwC, and they told him send me for an interview. Now you still have to do the interview and get accepted, right?
Okay.
But if the door wasn't opened, you may never get the opportunity, right? And the same thing when I went to Unilever. Somebody from PwC gave me a recommendation and told me go and have a conversation with a particular gentleman at PwC who happened to be the company secretary. Right? Dominica was all different. That was actually me answering to an ad placement. But because I had come from Unilever, right, it was, they didn't bother to look at anybody else after because they were doing, what they were producing was the exact same lines that Unilever produced. So I was just a natural fit, right? Then moving from Dominica to Antigua, there was a partner from Pricewaterhouse in Antigua who recommended me to a brewery in Antigua. And then he later recommended me to a gentleman that I would become business partners with. And then when that expired, he also recommended me to a firm that I did consulting for 20 years, right? If you didn't have support at all those levels, where would I have been? I don't know. Maybe I'd have made it like I've done now. But I can tell you it was a lot easier, right, with that support. And in turn, I try to support many others that way, right? Because it's about opening a door. You still have to walk through, right? But life is a lot easier if somebody opens a door for you.
Well, so in speaking of that, because you lived across multiple islands, that's Trinidad, Dominica, and Antigua. Most people stay in one place. What was it like moving between those spaces, and what did each island give you that the others couldn't?
Okay, Trinidad to Dominica I was very young, right? I went there at the age of 28, right? I had no attachments per se. Okay? So it was just a sense of exploration, curiosity, right? Plus a significantly better salary than I would have gotten in Trinidad because Dominica's currency is a higher value currency to the US dollar than is the Trinidad currency, right? So that was more a sense of exploration, right? Moving from Dominica to Antigua that uses the same currency was, by that time I had been married and had two sons, right? Dominica didn't have, Dominica is a very small island. 60,000 people now is the population, right? It didn't have a lot of opportunity for my sons, right? So while I was happy in Dominica, I didn't think it was fair to, have them be shortchanged because they weren't exposed to what I was exposed to. And that's what led to the move to Antigua, which gave them much more opportunity, So, just as an example, my second son was a swimmer for Antigua, went all around the Caribbean, represented them in competitions.
Mm-hmm.
Dominica doesn't even have a pool, so therefore he would never have had that exposure, right? You know, my sons got into other sporting activities where I was actually able to be a soccer coach for them for many years. I would not have done that in Dominica because I would still have been employed in Dominica and would not have had the time, right, to be able to support them the way I was in Antigua because but at a certain stage I was doing consulting, which gave me the freedom of time that I wanted, right? So it gave me the financial security plus the time freedom. And if you're into family, if you're into health and those things, if you don't have time freedom, those things are going to suffer. I guarantee you that because that's what I see all the time. Right? So hopefully that answers for you what one island gave me that another one couldn't. But it also had to do with the where I was in life at the time.
So, when did you first realize that you were wired a little differently than the people around you? That your mind worked in a way that set you apart?
I guess very early because as my parents told me for a long time, I was very contrarian, right? So although I was an accountant, as an example, I hated wearing ties. I never wore shirt and tie as an accountant. I never wore a suit, never wore a jacket to any of the areas I was employed in, right? So I had a very early inkling to being contrarian. I just would push back against certain things because I didn't like it. It didn't work for me. And I didn't just say, well, that's what everybody does. No. And I guess some of that comes from my dad because he's a little that way as well. Um, but like to what I'm doing now, right? When I was studying in Canada, I was where I first saw, let's call it the hustle culture, right? Where everybody was always hustling,
Mm-hmm.
right? And coming from the Caribbean, I was like, that's not the life I want, right? People are always serious. They would barely look at you in, like in the Caribbean, everybody we pass, we'd acknowledge. We say hi or whatever it is, right? And then that could strike up a conversation. Anything could happen from there. Right? I saw a totally different world when I went up there. Everybody was sort of isolating themselves. No sense of community like you mentioned earlier, right? Everybody was in their own little cocoon and they didn't want to step outside. That was definitely not the life for me. It wasn't my nature. So those were sort of the initial areas where I sort of pushed back and was contrarian. And then from the business side, that's how it continued to evolve into what I'm doing now.
So, can you tell us from a cultural perspective, was this like the norm that you wanted to get past that is making you be the person to set apart from what the environment was that's making you such a great professional that you are today?
Hmm. Um, Culturally, I again I'd have to go back to my dad. He had discipline as a worker, so I guess that just filtered to me. Um, I never in the early days I didn't think twice about having to work extended hours or overtime or anything like that. Right? I I viewed it as part of learning, part of me growing as a person, right? But it was helped by the fact that I had a lot of good people around me all the time. immediate bosses were all very supportive, you know, to show you a sort of cultural difference. In Pricewaterhouse, so like the World Cup is going on now in your country, right? We use the World Cup games were during work hours when the World Cup was happening in those times, right? And the ladies in the office would hold down the office, allow the men to go and watch the game, right? And I'm talking, I was like 19 at this time, right? But I'm exposed to that from my bosses, right? And then we would, you know, do something in return for the ladies whenever they wanted to do something. So very early, I learned, again, support, you know, like they support you, you support them in return, right? There's give and take, but where everybody wins as against one one set of people only taking all the time, like I see a lot in certain cultures, you know. So my answer to that from a cultural standpoint, uh, I wouldn't say it happens like everywhere in the Caribbean, but I know it does happen with a lot of business spaces. You know, the owners are not that strict, they're not that demanding. They understand give and take, right? Especially in private enterprise as against public sector. So that seems to filter through for us, at least in the parts of the Caribbean that I have lived.
So, who were the most influential people in your early life? The ones who planted seeds in you that you're still watering today?
Mm. There are quite a few, but I'll still go back to my dad. My dad definitely was very influential in that. Uh, you know, and he was a great role model that I guess I didn't realize until later in life, but at least I realized it when he was alive still. Right? Um, for somebody not to finish secondary school and then put 4 children through university, not in Trinidad, but away, right? That's a huge achievement in my eyes, anyhow, right? It also taught me, he also taught me responsibility because when he gave me, in those days, they'll give you a check, like a bank draft, right? That you would leave the island with. And he was, you know, this is it. Don't ask for any more. You need to make sure that this works for the year, right? I would not even think about that type of responsibility, right? So I've always encouraged people to step outside, you know, go on their own, be independent, where you don't have like the immediate parents or family that you could fall back on because you messed up, right? When you don't have that, you look at life differently, you do things a lot differently. And I definitely encourage young people, even if it's for 6 months, right? Make it part of your plan to move away from your support system. Go out on your own, figure stuff out on your own.
Okay. So, Caribbean people often carry a dual identity, rooted deeply in island culture, but also to a larger world stage. Did you feel that tension growing up? And how did you navigate it?
I have to be honest and say I don't think I ever really felt that tension. Um,
Okay.
for me, okay, so the US would be the closest developed country to us, right? That's where our
Uh-huh.
travel naturally is. Um, some people would have gone to the UK, but the majority of people go to the US, right? for me, it was always somewhere to visit, somewhere to experience something different, to shop, because we wouldn't, have what you offer from a shopping standpoint. Sometimes to get, sample different foods that you mightn't get otherwise. But I've never had the feeling that I'm missing out because I'm not living, in another country that could offer more from a development standpoint. Because
Right.
for me, I've always valued the beaches, the easy way of life, the nature walks, that type of stuff, and your part of the world doesn't really offer that like it does in my part of the world. Even in Trinidad, it was like half hour to 40 minutes to the beach, to the popular beach, right? In Antigua, it's like 10 minutes for me. If I lived in your part of the world, some people never see the beach, right? They have to travel. Sometimes they have to take a flight to go and see the beach, right?
Right.
So for me, that is more important than any material benefits that a developed country could offer. So I didn't really have that issue with the dual, uh, I said dual, what's the term I'm looking for? Wanting to be somewhere else while being where you are. I've always been about where I am in the Caribbean. That's my lane. That's where I've always wanted to be.
So, was entrepreneurship something you saw molded around you as a child, or was it a road you had to discover entirely on your own?
Um, I saw it early with my dad, as I said. Um, but then afterwards, I followed the career path. I went into corporate. Right. I saw a lot of entrepreneurs struggling while I was in corporate. Right. Primarily because even when they were considered to be doing well, they always seemed unhappy. They weren't enjoying what they were doing. They weren't enjoying the benefits of what they were doing. So even when we would be, let's say we meet them at a party or fete or whatever, they always look tired, right? They didn't have the energy to enjoy what they should have been, right? So that's why when I sort of went the entrepreneurial route, I went into consulting rather than starting a hard product type business, because I could control my time. I could also choose who I worked with. Right? And that for me was always more important than the outward status symbols and the outward measures of success. Success for me is always internal, how I feel about it, what it does for me, on my inside, on how my nervous system reacts to it. Right? Am I happy? If I'm not happy, why do I stay there? And that actually was how I left certain jobs, because I wasn't happy. So why stay there? How long are you going to stay in something that makes you unhappy? Right? I know a lot of people get stuck in that phase. For me, sometimes I may have been too hasty, but one of my the last CEO that I worked with, where I was a CFO in the company, he was the one to point out to me that, do you realize you never stay more than 2 years anywhere? And I never saw it. I never recognized it, right? Because every move was an upward move. But he pulled out my CV and he said, look at your CV, right? because he was upset with himself because he was saying he should have seen it coming, right? I was like, how you would see it coming? I didn't see it coming. Something came up. It made sense for me. I want to go and explore it, right? Said, but you don't stay more than 2 years, and there's almost 2 years to the day everywhere. So there's something inside me that caused that to happen all the time. So subconsciously, I guess I was always looking for exit after 2 years, right? And I usually found it. And then when it wasn't happening, I would just move and go to something that would make more sense for me.
So, if you could go back and have a conversation with the young Andre, maybe 12 or 13 years old, standing somewhere in Trinidad, what would you say to him?
That's really interesting. Um, I would say do everything the same way I did it, right? Up until um, up until my divorce, because I could see how I could have done things a little differently, right? But prior to my divorce, I had 50 good years, so I wouldn't change anything. I tell him, follow your gut, go with your feel, right? Develop your relationships. You know, sports has given me a lot of relationships that I still haven't enjoyed. I always encourage people to get that sense of community from some sporting endeavor. Right? And I'm not referring to like chess. I'm talking about real physical sports, team sports as against individual sports. Because team sports is where you really make the connections. You know, and team sports also teaches you the benefit of working with teams within a company. Because teams have in any sporting endeavor. If you don't pull together, you're going to lose, right? And you're not only going to lose, you're going to lose badly, right? Teamwork is essential for any business to do well. Even if you feel that you are a solopreneur, you never, very seldom are you truly a solopreneur. You have to outsource certain things to people at different times, right? If you outsource well and you develop well with your team, right, your business is going to grow and it's going to make you lighter because it's going to take a lot of weight off your shoulders. So that's how I would answer that one. Like I wouldn't really do anything different up until I was about 50, and then, you know, I'd be a little more, deliberate in the choices I made after divorce because I kind of lost my way
Okay.
for a bit. So
So let's talk a little bit about your journey into entrepreneurship. Um, Walk me through the early chapters of your career. You didn't wake up one day as the freedom architect. What were the formative years of your professional life like?
I'll answer that. So I have two sides to my professional life. I have the corporate side and I have the consulting and mentorship side, right? The corporate side prepared me for the consulting and mentorship side in several ways. I got the discipline from the corporate side. So when many people have difficulty working from home, for instance, that was never an issue for me because I always had the discipline, right? So once I set aside an area in the home, that's my office. It's the same equivalent as me going to any other office, right? I know how to set my boundaries and work with it, right? Whereas I know a lot of people struggle with it, right?
Right.
Um, And then moving fully into the entrepreneurship side of it, I had all the experiences I had from corporate to draw on to be able to offer companies a service that would make sense for them. And by being able to do that, I was able to be very fulfilled because it was something that I enjoyed doing, right? It wasn't something I had to do because I needed the money to come in. So I'm very blessed that I've always felt fulfilled in everything I've done on the entrepreneurial side. I'm blessed too because I didn't have, I cannot think right now of a bad client that I had because I was always able to choose the clients that I wanted to work with. And that's why people tell me I never look stressed. I'm sure I've been stressed at different times, right? But very seldom extended, you know. I just don't feel that type of stress because I've been that blessed, you know.
So, you know, you said something earlier in your answer that I think is really important. And if you could, you know, let's elaborate on this. So maybe some of the younger up and coming entrepreneurs, especially around there in the Caribbean area, and those that are out here in the audience in general, can learn something. Tell us about that discipline part. What did the discipline do that's helped you to this point?
In my case, when I say discipline, I incorporate several things into it, right? So planning, for instance, falls under that category, right? And a lot of people think of discipline as, you know, you to focus on work like a 9 to 5 or whatever, right? Discipline for me is it incorporates several things. Do you start working before you have a plan? To me, the answer is no, right? You take your time, you analyze what you need to do, right? You evaluate whatever the project or whatever the problem is, right? And you must always ask questions. People tend to skip that step, right? They want to get into the task right away, right? So the discipline is in the process as well, right? What's the outcome for whatever task it is that you want or you expect? Once you get clear on that, then you can plan by doing a reverse engineering, right? That then tells you the steps that you take to accomplish what you want to accomplish in what time frame.
Okay.
Was very important actually from places like PwC and Unilever because they are multinational corp very important with their process.
So you studied in Algonquin College and the University of Ottawa. How did formal education shape your thinking, and where did it fall short of preparing you for the real work you'd eventually do?
When I went when I went to Algonquin, which was the first phase of it, right, that was when I became exposed to people much older than me in a classroom, right? All before that, everybody in the classroom would be my age, right? And then suddenly, I was met with people coming to class in a suit, you know, like 20, 30 years, 40 years older than me, right? So I have to be honest and say, I felt small at that time. I was like, okay, I'm out of my league here, right? I just need to stay quiet and listen to what they say, right? Which is not necessarily a good thing, right? because in retrospect, I stayed quiet for too long. Whereas if I actually had the confidence to interact with them more, I would probably have, learned more and advanced at a faster pace. I was able to do that later on, but certainly in the early part, I was like, I'm out of my league. I need to just stay quiet, sit at the back, and try and pick up as much as I could pick up. Right. Again, that's not something I recommend for everyone to do. That was just what happened to me at that stage. But eventually, I'd say from maybe like my second year, right, when I started to feel more comfortable with them, right. The benefit for me was being able to see how whatever we were studying applied in the real world, because these people who are already working in the real world, right, they were able to bring the perspective of real world working environment to the classroom. And that was very beneficial. And to most of us from Trinidad, because we tended not to do the two things together. You either just studied and then you went into work in most cases, right? And now here I was exposed to something totally different. So I still am not very good at working and studying at the same time. It's one or the other for me still, right? But I benefited a lot from the insight that they were able to bring, right? And that helped me almost everywhere I went after, because I was able to understand and implement what I was learning in the classroom. I've seen too many people come to me for interviews. They're qualified, but they have nothing to offer because they've never worked, right?
Wow.
But then they have an expectation of a salary and a big salary, you know? No, and I keep telling them in certain fields, you still have to pay your dues. Because what you're actually asking me to do now, you you got qualified, and now you want me to pay you to learn how to implement it in the real world. That doesn't quite cut it.
Right.
You still have to be able to pay your dues before you have the salary expectation.
So the younger entrepreneurs, the younger generation that's out here that's watching today, what are some tips you can give them about entrepreneurship that they should more than adhere and take this advice in order to make their lives, their businesses that much more prosperous here in the future?
Before prosperous, I would use it to make it a easier path for them, right? Because too many of them on a path of self-discovery, right? And they're being conditioned to believe that they have to do it all on their own, so they're in isolation as well, right? Whatever entrepreneurship venture that you want to pursue, right? If you've been working before, I'd say build up, like you don't make the decision today for tomorrow, right? Again, it's part of planning. So I'd say make sure you have at least 6 months of living expenses available to you, so you're not stressing about money right away. Then do up your concept, and then find a mentor or several to run it by them, right? Let them give you feedback on your idea, right? Once you get that feedback, the step that many people miss is validation, right? You need to test it. You need to test your idea before you run with it like crazy, right? And before you put money into it, right? So find, a few people to help you test Yeah, you run your idea by them, see what their feedback is. If you have a product, create a prototype, share it with people, get your feedback. But too many people have an idea, they think it's a great idea, and they just run with it. And then suddenly they spent a whole bunch of money and nothing is coming in. That's a recipe for disaster. You know, you have to be patient. You have to go through the phases and make sure you have somebody to see you.
So, what was your first real encounter with organizational dysfunction? That moment where you looked at a leadership structure and said, "This is broken, and I think I know how to fix it."
Okay, the two of them didn't quite go together for me. The first instance of organizational, dysfunction was my last corporate job, and the CEO and I couldn't get along because we used to clash a lot, right? Because he was very abrasive, and it wasn't only me he was abrasive to, and he was abrasive to me in a much milder way than to everybody else in the organization, right? And that was one of the times when I was hasty, when I was like, you know what, you have my resignation tomorrow. And this was like after 6 weeks in the job. The chairman came down. He asked me not to leave. He was in Germany. He asked me not to leave, to wait until he came down. And then the three of us will thrash it out, right? And eventually the CEO realized that his approach, and I don't like to use this term, but it was like, I know you'd be familiar with it. It was like massa treating, those beneath it, right? And I was never that person. Okay? Because my father never treated me that way. You're not going to come and treat me that way. But that's not necessarily something I would suggest to everyone, right? You have to have confidence that you have options before you do that, right? Now, I eventually stayed at that company for 2 years, although I had initially resigned after 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So immediately when the chairperson came down, the three of us came to the understanding that we had to have a change in organizational culture, right? And the CEO had to change his ways, because you're talking about 200 people that he was the leader of, but he was not showing leadership ability. He was showing a sort of massa mentality, if you want to put it that way, right? So he was gradually able to change, right? We actually became, I would say, almost friends by the time I had left, because he was able to change and I was able to adapt. Right? But for organizational dysfunction to change, there must be a willingness from leadership for it to change. Right? If the leadership isn't willing for it to change, it will never change, no matter what you try to implement. Right? It has to come from the top. And leaders seem to forget that, just like children, right? People model what they see. If you're giving out whatever vibe you're giving out, the people beneath you are going to model it the same way, right?
Yep.
And if everybody is modeling negativity, then the organization is going to fail or just not perform to the best of its ability. Right? So to answer, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead and finish.
I was just going to say, so bring it into what I do now, right? That's one of the first things I do when I go in any organization, work with anybody in a personal capacity side, right? No change takes place unless whoever is the leader, right, is willing to change themselves.
So you've spent over 30 years in this space. In those early years, who were the mentors or models who helped you develop your frameworks and your philosophy?
The mentors, again, there were many. Um, like the gentleman I mentioned to you from Price Waterhouse earlier, right? But I'd say everywhere I went, I was blessed with genuine leaders, right? I saw how they treated their employees, even when they were upset, right? That was momentary. It's not something that lasted, right? And then I saw the respect that almost everyone had for them, including myself, right? So I was able to model that everywhere I went and continue to model it, right? And once I sort of got that framework down, that the only way a business does well is if you treat your people well, right? Once you get that understanding, it's easier for other things to fall into place, right? Because if I came, for instance, and told you, Charles, you have too much on your plate, right? You don't need to be making decisions for X, Y, and Z, right? You're going to push back because that's what you know, right? If I can help you to change your thinking by showing you how it could be better for you, if you were able to step back, right? And able to trust people that you have under you, right? And that's one of the things I was always able to do. Help them by training the people under them to be able to step up, right? And develop confidence and take decisions, from not a place of fear, but a place of confidence because they're exposed and they know what to do. Right? The only way they can make decisions that way is to be given the opportunity to think for themselves and develop their own style and their own way of evaluating a problem, assessing it. Right? Because there's no one way for that to take place. I may evaluate something totally different to you, but we could come up with the same outcome. So it's just to encourage everybody to look inside, right, and be the leader that they know they could be. Because everybody's a leader
Okay.
if they allow themselves to be.
Okay, so there had to be a pivotal moment, a crossroads, where you chose to go all in on your own path rather than climb someone else's ladder. What was that moment for you?
The same company I mentioned earlier, all right. When I left that company, the decision was I'm done with corporate. I'm going into something where I could be the primary decision maker, even if it was with a partner, right? But it would just be two of us, or me primarily, being in the leadership role. Because too many times you get frustrated by leaders who they don't want growth or they don't want too much growth from the people beneath them, right? And I've always found that frustrating, where if you ask me to do something, then allow me to do it. Don't look over my shoulder, right? Support me, okay? Because if you didn't think I could do it, then why are you asking me to do it? So if you're going to ask me to do it, allow me to do it, right? You can guide me, right? And you can also give me feedback after so that I could, if I made a mistake, I can improve next time around. Because there's none of us who's perfect. We all have to make mistakes. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. So support me.
In those early days of building your practice, what was the hardest thing to overcome? The self-doubt, the market, the positioning, or something else entirely? What was it?
By the time I went into my life, I didn't have this self-doubt. Positioning was a bit of an issue because that was a bit foreign to me. Because when you're in corporate, you have people that do marketing for you, right? That wasn't my strong point, per se, right? I didn't even understand as a professional that you had to market yourself very similar to how you have to market a corporation, right? And that your positioning was important. So that was one of the things that I had to learn. And even now, right, your positioning isn't fixed. It keeps evolving. It has to evolve, otherwise you're going to get left behind. So positioning for me, and when you talk about a business as well, positioning leads to lead generation, right? A lot of businesses suffer with lead generation because they don't understand positioning, they don't understand messaging, right? And they don't understand authority, right? For some professionals, you can get away depending on referrals only. But in this time, especially with so much businesses being done online, right, positioning is key. Because if you can't position yourself properly, you will not be successful.
So you work primarily with 6, 7, and 8-figure business owners. When you first started, was that your target client, or did your client evolve over time and teach you who you were really meant to serve?
Yeah, it was not my, that wasn't always my target audience. And I did not start off with the freedom architect messaging either, right? I was still, so my previous iteration to this was Biz Accelerator Coach, because that was more in line with what I had done as a consultant, right? Helping people improve their efficiencies and looking at their costings and all those things and improving their bottom line. And this goes back a bit to when you mentioned about mentors earlier. I came across a mentor who told me he thought that I was not doing myself justice and not really selling what I should be selling. Right? So I shared. So he said, in my opinion, you should be selling freedom. And I didn't understand it at the time because I was like, freedom, that's so weird. Like, who wants to know about freedom, right? So I kind of left that way it was. And then about 8 months later, I met a Tony Robbins coach. And he told me the same thing, but he was more specific. He was not just freedom, but you should be helping people to live the lifestyle that you live, right? Your Caribbean lifestyle. You don't have to be in the Caribbean to live a Caribbean lifestyle, right? As we were alluding to earlier. And that's how I eventually evolved into it. So the Biz Accelerator Coach was like 3 years. But I kind of got fed up with that. Prior to that, I did digital marketing because I was just looking for something different. That's what I mentioned, kind of losing my way a bit. I did digital marketing for 2 years. It was interesting, but it clearly wasn't me. I wasn't really fulfilled doing that. That's how I came back into the Biz Accelerator Coach. And then through the other influences, when I finally grasped what they meant, I was able to embrace the Freedom Architect fully.
So, what is the biggest misconception that entrepreneurs have when they first come to you? The thing they believe about business or leadership that you almost always have to gently dismantle?
Well, one of the big things is the more you make, right?
Mm-hmm.
Almost every entrepreneur and business person has that in their locker because that's conditioning from the time we were small, right? That's something we've heard from the time we've been very small, right? And then closely aligned to that is the more you learn, the more you earn, right? But that's not true either because we know highly qualified people academically who don't earn well because you still have to be able to implement or integrate whatever you've learned into whatever you are selling. They work hard when you help them to see that that's really a myth, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a big eye opener for them, but they push back against it very often because they default to that behavior from the time they feel any form of pressure. And when you feel pressure, you just double down, you work harder, right? You have to push through. But that doesn't allow you time to think. That doesn't allow you time to recharge, right? And it certainly doesn't help your health or your relationships or so many other things, right? Working harder is only going to give you less time for relationships. Most people health slips and they let it continue to slide, right? Because they're so taken up and engrossed in working harder, right? Okay, so you push yourself, and there's an example I have to use very often. You push yourself, you push yourself, you push yourself, and then you have a breakdown, or you have a major health event. For many, it's been a heart attack or a stroke, right? For the ones who survive, they could suddenly make a change tomorrow, right? Why can't you make that change before the health scare? Because of the conditioning. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's almost every time the first thing I
Okay.
see in people. You know, I don't think I've not had one person where that's what I see as the first thing that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be addressed.
So when you think about your community and you think about your work as an entrepreneur, what do you want people in your community to learn and from your work as an entrepreneur?
Okay, Charles, you broke up a little bit there. Could you repeat that for me, please?
When you think about your business as an entrepreneur, the work that you do as an entrepreneur and your community, what do you want your community to learn from your work as an entrepreneur as to the embetterment and the improvements of people in the community to get better with entrepreneurship?
I'll try to make it simple. You got into entrepreneurship for a reason. For most people, it's for a better lifestyle, freedom, freedom to make choices, that type of stuff, right? Instead, what they tend to do is bring corporate into their entrepreneurship venture because that's what they knew, right? So there's one question that I ask everyone. What did you get into business for? What was the life that you wanted your business to provide for you?
Mhm.
If you can't answer that question, we can't move forward because that's your baseline. I could only help you if you have that baseline, right? So the first part is always to help them establish a baseline. Right? And it's surprising how many people cannot answer that question. because they've been on default. They building their business automatically because they're just doing what they see other people do, right? Without the recognition that you can design your business, right, to support the life that you want. So which one comes first, work or life? Which is why I push back against the term work-life balance, because work comes first for a reason, right? The language tells you what you're being conditioned to. So why isn't it life-work balance, where life comes before work? Right? When you make those subtle shifts, you start approaching things differently. So that's how I would answer that for you.
So, how has the landscape of entrepreneurship in the Caribbean changed over 30 plus years you've been doing this work? And do you think Caribbean entrepreneurs are getting the support they deserve on the world stage?
Support they deserve on the world stage. I don't know if they deserve any support. Nobody deserves anything. You have to make it. You have to step up and change your environment for what you want, right? I think one of the issues with a lot of people in the Caribbean goes back to what you had said earlier, where they keep looking at television, for instance, right? Which is one of the worst things that they could do, because then they keep getting this message that this is what success is supposed to look like. This is what you need to aspire to, right? Yeah. And then they start aspiring to that instead of maintaining our cultural values, right? So you suddenly find them moving away from community type stuff, becoming more and more isolated. So I grew up in what would have been considered an affluent area, right? But we had community. We didn't have, it's now a gated community, but it wasn't then, right? And we knew, all our parents encouraged us to be friendly with the people outside of our community, right? But that doesn't happen now. You know, too many of the more affluent areas in Trinidad, for instance, are gated, right? Just like you are in the US. Right? But that's not truly our lifestyle, right? Our lifestyle was knowing your neighbors, right? My parents knew almost all the friends that I had in our residential area. And that would be like over 30, but they knew them all. They would all come to my house, different ages at different periods in time. Right? My parents didn't have any concerns about us going out with them because they knew, they were confident that the older ones would take care of the younger ones and it passed through that way to us, right? Now, that doesn't seem to exist anymore, right? So everybody, you may know your neighbor next door and like say 2 houses away, maximum. And you don't know beyond that, right? And you're becoming more and more isolated because you're aspiring more and more to what you're being influenced by on the TV, right? So does everybody need a Mercedes in an affluent area? Does everybody need a Tesla? Whatever you want to call it, right? Do those vehicles do anything more for you than a Honda, a top Toyota, a top Ford, anything, right?
Right.
When you start being influenced too much by status and by symbols, right? That's where the Caribbean has started to lose it because they're adopting the US lifestyle too much, especially at the affluent stage.
Oh wow, that's interesting. So then, so I'm assuming that the influence of what they're seeing on TV, which is fantasy, compared to what's reality is what they're finding it difficult to live by. So basically, this is interesting because there's some similarities to that actually here in America, because when people see this stuff on TV and knowing that that's fantasy, I mean, there's nothing real about that. But for some strange reason, to aspire to do that, and then you come back to reality and you have to be in this real world. Why do you think it's difficult to make that adjustment? Because, I mean, if you got what you know is real, why can't you work with that?
Because of the fantasy, right? You just said it, right? My reality, right?
Mhm.
I've been conditioned is the word I always come back to. I've been conditioned to believe that my reality is not good enough, right?
Okay.
But it doesn't have anything to do with relationships or people, right?
Right.
It's all
Right.
appearance, right? And material possessions, because that's all that TV shows you, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So for me to look happy like what I see, because they're not seeing what's beneath, they're only seeing the happy appearance. Everybody who has material possessions, as you see them on TV, always look happy, right?
Yeah.
That's what we need. That's what we want to aspire to, because that's what you're seeing. And if you're being bombarded with that every day, every hour of every day, right? It's Have you ever heard of a guy called Peter Sage?
What's the name?
Peter Sage, Sage.
I think I have heard that name before.
I would just suggest anybody in the audience to look him up as well. But he, I actually did a 5-day session with him last week, and I had to laugh just because one of the things he said, right? Stop watching TV, right?
Yep.
Stop
Yep.
looking at the news,
Yep.
right? The news brings nothing but negativity to you. Very seldom do you hear a feel good story, right? The news is there to encourage you to live in fear, right?
Yep. That's the sensationalism.
Right. And then the flip side of that is you now start to become fearful for your lifestyle. Because either it's not going to provide for you long term, it's going to have you in an area that's like not a good area. It's suddenly exposed to um, elements that you don't want to grow up with, although it would have been a good area when you were growing up, right? It suddenly has become an area that you no longer feel comfortable in, right? That's by design, right? The 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 elements that you don't want to be associated with, they didn't just turn up overnight. That's part of a bigger design, right? So if you keep buying into the agenda, you keep buying into the news, you keep buying into the propaganda, all the and all the ads. Look at the ads, right? Even for entrepreneurs, they want to aspire to be like somebody that they saw, right? Or they've been exposed to. Right? And everybody looks like an overnight success. Do you do you know of any TV show, for instance, that tells you about the 10 years that they struggled before or the 15 years that they struggled before? No, they only pick up when they become successful. And this is the lifestyle that they now have. And then somehow or the other, you think you should be able to achieve that lifestyle within months or a year at maximum. And then that creates a spiral for you because you're always stressing to reach that level, not realizing it's all by steps. And very few people, and I know you would accept this in a big way, Charles. We've always been conditioned not to have gratitude. Gratitude for what we've lost, right? If you don't have gratitude for what you have, you can never be happy. Because gratitude is internal and happiness is internal. But we're looking for external validation for happiness all the time. And that's because of the media. If you don't disconnect, as we say, you don't disconnect from the matrix, you're going to stay in the matrix.
That's interesting. Let's talk a little bit about you becoming the freedom architect. The name, the freedom architect. Where did it come from? Was there a single defining moment where that identity clicked into place, or did it emerge gradually over years of work?
I'd say it emerged gradually over the last 12 months, right? Because the architect part came afterward, right? I didn't even have a moniker at one time, okay? But through positioning and content, right? There was a gentleman who had called me and he said, he asked me about my work, you know, with helping people become free and business people to live a freedom lifestyle, which is what I used to refer to all the time, right? A freedom lifestyle. And he used the word architect, you know, like you actually more like an architect, you're helping them to design, you know. Just like an architect in real life will design a building, you're helping them to design a business that serves their life, right? And then I was about to do a new website and I started looking for names, right? And then ChatGPT actually helped me a lot there because it gave me some feedback, right? It didn't give me freedom architect straight off. But more and more, you know, it started to give me the feedback, like this is where I should be heading. So my umbrella is actually, my website is missionfreedomhq.com. So missionfreedomheadquarters.com, right? That's the umbrella. And then the freedom architect is the voice, is the messaging, right? It's the way that I want to help people to live, right? That's where that voice comes from, you know. So helping people to architect their business for freedom. And that's how the name came about eventually.
Okay. So when you say architect, someone's freedom, what does that actually look like in practice? Walk us through what that process means. What do you tear down? What do you build?
Okay, I don't like the term tear down, okay, only because tear down is destructive, right? So the process is, so I have a process called ARIS, ARIS. That stands for awareness, recognition, reset, redesign, right? Immerse and integrate, and then sustain and support, or support and sustain, right? That's how the forward abbreviation came up. So I have to they become aware through my content, right? They start to wake up through my content, right? They start gaining recognition through my content or through a lead magnet, one or two lead magnets that I share, right? And I shouldn't call it lead magnets, I should just call it resources, right? Because they both have a sort of assessment component to it, a quiz that helps you start asking different questions, right? So once they do that and they come in the ecosystem fully. The first stage, like I told you, is to help them think differently. Because if there's no way you're going to achieve any form of change or transformation if you're thinking the same way that you were before you came into it. Right? And that's where we start looking at what's the belief systems that they have, what's really holding them back, what's causing them to look at life in a particular way, look at business in a particular way. Right? So for everybody, it's different. As I mentioned earlier, the one thing is that everybody thinks working harder means you'll obviously earn more. We know that's not true. Because at the most menial job where people are not earning a good salary, they work hard, but they're not earning more, right? So that's a fallacy. That has always been a myth. Yeah. That's one of the ones that you have. If you want to use the term tear down, that's the one that I would actually tear down. Most of the others is more subtle, right? But work harder is a myth, right? And sometimes I have to tear it down because sometimes they're holding on to it too hard, too dear. Right? Because remember, this didn't come from parents alone. In some cases, it came from grandparents too. Charles,
Hello?
you
Yes.
disappeared. You disappeared very briefly there just now.
Okay. I am sorry about that. Look, final question for you. The word freedom means something different to everyone who hears it. How do you define freedom specifically in the context of business and leadership? And how did you arrive at that definition?
My definition of freedom is very simple, right? Being able to do what you want, when you want, how you want, right? A lot of successful people lose simple things like joy, spontaneity. Spontaneity for me is the biggest indicator for freedom, right? If you can't just decide today to get up and do something different because you feel like it, right? Then you don't have
Mhm.
freedom. So that's why that my definition: do what you want, when you want, how you want, right? That's what
So,
my design is about.
as we go through, this ending here, we didn't get a chance to cover all information, so we definitely would love to have you back. But can you give? Do you have any words of wisdom and encouragement for our audience, and how they can connect with you via your social media, your website, how they can get your book, all of those good things?
The simplest way is to go through the website, which is missionfreedomhq.com. That will link them into everything that you just mentioned there.
Okay. You got any words of wisdom and encouragement for our audience?
Stop watching the news, right? Stop watching the news religiously, right? If you saw a story today, why do you need to follow it every hour of the day, right? Start freeing that mental space because every time you engage with it, right, you internalize something that you see it. And if it's something that's created fear for you, created anxiety for you, following it all the time is only going to increase it, right? And it's going to move you further and further away from freedom, definitely. So if you want a better lifestyle, if you want a business, or even within your company, if you're an executive or a senior leader, right? Why are you in business? you need to define that. You need to get really clear on it and then start leading from that rather than just being like going with the status quo, going with it because that's how it's always been. You have the power to change it, right? But the only way that change will occur and be sustainable is if you get very clear on what it is you want from your business and the life that you want your business to provide.
Well, I want to thank you for spending this time with us because, in learning, especially from a cultural perspective, that pretty much things are pretty much the same, no matter where we go around the world, because the
Yeah.
influences are just what they are. And I want to thank you, for your work and the work that you're doing to influence and inspire people, in your communities as you do the work that you do. Before I close the show, I want to ask, do you have a few minutes to stick around after I close?
Sorry, say that last part again. Do I have?
Do you have a few minutes to stick around after
Yeah,
I close the show?
sure. Yeah, no problem.
So, in closing, I want to thank each and every person that's been with us tonight, that's watched the show. I want to thank you for your time, and I'm sure and I hope that you've learned some things that Andre has put out, especially about entrepreneurship, because the influences are definitely real, and the things that he was putting out are definitely great tips that I think each and every individual should take and learn some things from. For those of you that are watching on all of our channels, especially the YouTube channels, if you have not yet subscribed and enabled all notifications, I do ask if you would please support us by subscribing and enabling all notifications and following the show. And so as we go live, you're able to click the show and just watch it. And you're also able to go back to the channel and watch each and every episode of every great guest that has been here, that has more than left inspirational and motivational points for each and every community, but they've left something that can help you as well. So in closing, I'm going to close with this monologue. Before I let you go tonight, I need to take a moment because this conversation deserves it. Andre Alexander, the Freedom Architect, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your time, your wisdom, your honesty, and your heart. What you share tonight is not just theory, it is lived truth. And I know that someone watching this right now needs exactly those words that you just put out, those lessons. Because here's what I want you to take with you tonight. The most important lesson from this conversation is this: building is not the goal, living is the goal, success is a vehicle, not a destination. And when your vehicle starts driving you instead of the other way around, you've lost the plot. True wealth is not the number in your account. True wealth is the freedom over your own time, your own choices, and your own life. That is what Andre Alexander has spent 30 years helping people reclaim. And that is what Freedom Conversations is all about. I want you to think about, what Andre has put out tonight, but we opened this show with a story that is telling you about not only how he started, but the things that he has done in business to grow those things that he does. So I want to thank you all. This has been America in Black and White. This is season 4, episode number 94. I want you guys to please come back and see us tomorrow night as we have another great show for you. Please just make sure that you stay cautious to the wind, but you also are mindful about the things that you do, because some influences can cause the biggest harm to you. Thank you all.